Welcome back to our channel. Today we're talking about a side of the Bates family that feels a little more complicated than usual. Because lately, it's not just the updates themselves that are getting attention, it's the meaning people are attaching to them. A grocery trip becomes a moving rumor, a family reunion becomes a parenting debate, and a photo shoot becomes a full conversation about image and identity. That's really where this family is right now. And once you start looking at the latest updates more closely, the pattern becomes pretty clear. The Bates family isn't being watched in a casual way anymore. People aren't just seeing what gets posted, they're reading into it, comparing it, and trying to figure out what it says about where each sibling is headed. Some of that attention is fair, some of it is probably way too much, but either way, it's shaping how every update lands. Katie Bates is probably the clearest example of that right now, because what she shared wasn't especially dramatic on its own. It started with something pretty ordinary, a grocery shopping video and a mention that she was shopping for a Florida rental. That's it. No major announcement, no big emotional reveal, no obvious attempt to create suspense. But within that one detail, people immediately started building a much bigger narrative around her. At the most basic level, it makes sense why people noticed it. If a Bates sibling casually mentions staying in Florida for several weeks, followers are going to pay attention. But what's interesting is how quickly the reaction moved past simple curiosity and into full speculation. For some viewers, this wasn't just about a temporary stay, it became a possible sign of house hunting, a relocation plan, or even the beginning of a more permanent life shift. And that's where the conversation got more layered. Because once the idea of maybe they're moving entered the picture, people didn't stop there. They started asking why. And once that happens online, the why usually becomes more dramatic than the original post ever suggested. Some people began treating Florida less like a travel decision and more like a symbolic one, as if this could represent distance from Knoxville, distance from routine, or even distance from whatever pressures Katie may or may not feel in the environment she's been in. Then, almost inevitably, the speculation turned toward her marriage. That's really when the update stopped being about location and started becoming about emotional interpretation. Some people started suggesting that the move, or possible move, might reflect a desire for a fresh start, more independence, or some kind of attempt to reset the atmosphere around her and Travis. Others framed it in even more loaded terms, treating the Florida stay like it must be evidence of deeper instability. And that's where things start to say more about the audience than the content itself. Because the truth is, nothing Katie shared directly confirms any of that. What she actually posted was relatively small, but for someone in her position, small doesn't stay small for long. That's the reality of being watched at this level now. Even a grocery haul can get turned into a theory about your marriage, your support system, and the kind of life you're trying to build behind the scenes. And honestly, that's what makes her update interesting. Not necessarily the Florida rental itself, but the way people responded to it. There's now an expectation that every piece of content should reveal something deeper, and when it doesn't, the audience often fills in the gaps on its own. Katie didn't really post a mystery. People just decided there had to be one. A very different kind of reaction has been building around Carlin and Evan, and theirs feels less like speculation and more like scrutiny. The moment that sparked it was supposed to be emotional in a straightforward way, a reunion with baby Navy Kate after time apart. Carlin's reaction was immediate and visibly intense. Tears, hugs, repeated kisses, all the signs of a mother missing her baby and feeling overwhelmed in the moment. If you isolate that part of the clip, it makes perfect sense why they shared it. But the internet rarely isolates one moment. It zooms out, notices what else is happening, and starts asking different questions. In this case, a lot of the criticism didn't focus on Carlin loving Navy too much. It focused on what viewers thought they weren't seeing enough of, especially when it came to Layla. People quickly started pointing out that the emotional attention seemed to go straight to the baby, and for some, that created a bigger concern about how their children are being presented in content overall. Once that concern took hold, the whole clip started being read differently. What may have been intended as a genuine family reunion got reframed as something more selective and more camera-aware. Some viewers said it felt like Navy was being centered as the emotional star of the moment, while Layla seemed almost pushed to the edge of it. That's a very specific kind of criticism, and whether people agree with it or not, it shows how much closer the audience is now watching the dynamics inside these family videos. And the comments got harsher from there. Some accused the couple of leaning too heavily into emotional reels and highly shareable moments. Others said the scene felt too neat, too edited, too conscious of how it would play online. A few people even pushed the conversation toward favoritism, which is obviously a loaded accusation to place on a short family clip. But once that word enters the conversation, it changes the tone completely. Suddenly, what was supposed to be a sweet return home becomes a debate about which child is being centered and why. That's really where the Stewart family sits right now, in a place where even their warmest moments are being filtered through a much more skeptical lens than before. And to be fair, some of that skepticism reflects a broader shift in how people view family creators in general. Audiences are much more sensitive now to the ways children are shown online, how emotional moments are framed, and whether something feels genuinely lived or subtly shaped for engagement. Carlin and Evan are not the only family creators dealing with that, but they are clearly in the middle of it. What makes this harder is that two things can be true at once. Carlin can absolutely have had a real emotional reaction to seeing Navy again, and viewers can still feel uneasy about the way the moment was captured and shared. Those things don't cancel each other out, and that's part of why this type of backlash tends to linger. It doesn't come from one obvious wrongdoing, it comes from a growing discomfort with the overall pattern. Then, in almost total contrast, there's Josie Bates-Balka, whose latest update isn't being pulled apart for emotional meaning in quite the same way. Instead, people are responding to her through a completely different lens: branding, aesthetics, polish, and image. While Katie is being read for clues and Carlin is being read for authenticity, Josie is increasingly being read like a businesswoman. And that's probably one of the most interesting shifts happening in the Bates family right now. Her latest photo set made that very obvious. Styled in a Western-inspired look with denim, structured pieces, a brown button-up, and a white cowboy hat, Josie's shoot didn't come across like a casual Instagram post. It looked like campaign material. The field backdrop, the posing, the styling, the overall finish, it all felt designed to support a specific identity, not just share a pretty photo. And that identity feels much more polished and independent than the one many people still associate with the Bates daughters. That's part of why people keep responding so strongly to Josie's evolution. She seems to have created a lane for herself that feels more detached from the family's original image than almost anyone else in the group. She still shares pieces of her life, but the way she presents herself feels much more curated around lifestyle, beauty, and aspirational branding than around family chaos or personal vulnerability. In other words, she doesn't feel like she's just posting life updates anymore. She feels like she's building a brand ecosystem. Of course, that kind of polish brings its own kind of commentary. Some followers have started speculating about her appearance, whether her face looks more refined because of makeup, styling, and photography, or whether there may be subtle cosmetic enhancements involved. That's a familiar internet cycle for any woman whose image starts to sharpen over time, especially when that image becomes tied to a beauty or lifestyle business. And whether that speculation is fair or not, it's part of the territory she's operating in now. But even that conversation says something useful. People are no longer reacting to Josie simply as a reality TV daughter from a large family. They're reacting to her as someone who has successfully shifted into a more elevated, almost influencer executive category. She's being read as someone intentional, expensive-looking, and professionally self-aware. That's a very different kind of attention than what some of her siblings are getting, and it shows how far apart their online identities have become. And honestly, that may be the clearest takeaway from all of this. The Bates family may still be linked by name, history, and audience overlap, but they're no longer functioning like one shared brand in the way they once did. They're being watched as separate public figures now, each one carrying a different kind of expectation. Katie gets interpreted through uncertainty. Carlin gets interpreted through emotional family optics. Josie gets interpreted through polish and ambition. Same family, completely different forms of pressure. That's also why their updates keep pulling people in. It's not just because people still care about the Bates family as a whole. It's because each sibling now offers a different version of what life after reality TV can look like. Some are still leaning into intimacy and openness. Some are trying to refine themselves into something more aspirational. And some are caught in that uncomfortable middle where ordinary life keeps getting turned into online theory. So when you step back and look at these updates together, the bigger picture becomes pretty clear. This isn't really just about Florida, a reunion clip, or a fashion shoot. It's about what happens when a family that built itself on visibility keeps evolving inside a digital space that no longer watches passively. Everything gets read harder now. Everything carries subtext. And for the Bates siblings, that means even the most ordinary-looking post can end up telling a much bigger story than they probably intended. So now it comes back to you. Which update stands out to you the most? Katie and Travis in Florida? Carlin and Evan's emotional reunion? Or Josie's polished new direction? Let me know your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more Bates family updates like this.